Here is a great, deep, and detailed summary of the passage, explained in very simple, clear words, like the best teacher helping a beginner. Summary: Rajadhiraja's victory ceremony and the Chalukya's hidden hope. After a long, violent campaign in the Deccan, the Chola Emperor Rajadhiraja had defeated many Chalukya cities. He wanted to hold a huge royal ceremony to show that he was now the greatest king in the land, the conqueror of the Chalukyas. His dream was to make his enemy, Samshvara, the Chalukya king, stand helplessly at this ceremony and act as a door guard, opening the doors like a servant while Rajadhiraja was being crowned a victorious hero. This would have been a terrible insult and a huge symbol of Chola power. This idea came from an earlier moment in Indian history, in around 750 CE, when the Rashtrakuta king Danti Durga did this exact thing to his defeated rivals in Ujjain during a sacred ritual called the Golden Womb Sacrifice. Rajadhiraja wanted to copy that event to gain the same fame and honor. But Samashvara had escaped, and Rajadhiraja couldn't humiliate him in person. So instead, he took a statue of a temple guard from a Chalukya temple and used that statue to represent Samashvara in the ritual. This was a mockery, as if to say, since you're too scared to come, this statue will take your place. At this ceremony, Rajadhiraja gave himself a new title, Vijaya Rajendra, meaning Victorious Rajendra, Lord of Kings. He made the ritual grand and dramatic, showing off treasures he had looted and people he had captured from the war. It looked like the Cholas had completely won, and that the Deccan region had fallen to their feet. But not everything was over. Even though he had lost many battles, Samshvara still had a plan. He moved east into a region called Telangana, which was dry, poor, and often caught in wars. There, he joined forces with a local power, a small but ambitious ruling family called the Kakatiyas. At this time, the Kakatiyas were not very strong. They ruled a tough land, filled with herders and wandering groups, and had very little water, depending on seasonal rain. But in the future, the Kakatiyas would become a great empire, building temples, water tanks, and strong alliances, just like the old Deccan kings. For now, they were just starting. But by teaming up with Samashvara, they showed that the Chalukyas were not completely defeated yet. There was still resistance growing in the shadows, even while Rajadhiraja stood celebrating his moment of glory. Key points to remember. Rajadhiraja wanted a hero ceremony where he would insult Samashvara. He couldn't capture Samashvara, so he used a temple statue instead. He renamed himself Vijaya Rajendra, showing that he was the supreme victor. He displayed loot and prisoners to prove his dominance. It seemed the Cholas had conquered the Deccan. But Samashvara escaped and found allies in the Kakatiyas of Telangana. Though Telangana was poor then, the Kakatiyas would one day become powerful. Would you like a visual map, timeline, or separate short bios of each king or kingdom involved? Here is a great, deep, detailed summary of the passage asked about, written in the simplest possible English with full clarity and context. This summary explains the main events, key people, and their actions, along with the reasons behind them. It's written to be understood even if you are new to Indian history. Simple summary. In the year 1048 CE, the Chalukya king Sameshvara was in big trouble. His most dangerous enemy, the powerful Chola emperor, Rajadhiraja, had invaded the Deccan region, central India, and was destroying cities and villages. Rajadhiraja had already taken over many areas and had scared or diverse. It was slowly falling apart. At this time, Samshvara and his generals were gathered in Telangana, a dry and hot region in India. They were sitting in the heat, probably being fanned by servants, and drinking cool buttermilk to stay refreshed. They were discussing how to stop Rajadhiraja and save their empire. Important people like military officers, noblemen, and the Kakatiya chief and his son were likely part of this meeting. The Kakatiyas were a small but growing power in Telangana. Back then, they weren't a big empire yet, but they knew the land, and their soldiers were used to fighting in dry, rocky places. So they joined the Chalukyas as allies. As they talked and argued, Rajadhiraja was continuing to destroy towns in the Deccan. He was scaring the local lords so much that many of them surrendered and joined him, just to avoid being crushed. This made the situation even more dangerous for the Chalukyas. So Someshvara and his court came up with a bold and risky plan. Instead of fighting Rajadhiraja head-on in the Deccan, they would secretly attack his homeland, Tamilakam, especially the city of Kanchipuram. Kanchi was not only an important city, it was also very sacred and full of Chola pride. If Kanchi was destroyed, it would be a shame for Rajadhiraja. To carry out this plan, a Chalukya general named Pulakeshin was chosen. He was joined by the son of the Kakatiya chief, and together they gathered fast-moving light infantry, soldiers who could move quickly through the dry terrain. These troops were used to small raids, not big battles. They had to move very fast and in secret, because if Rajadhiraja found out, he would immediately return and stop them. The plan was to force Rajadhiraja to leave the Deccan and come back to defend his land. This was the Chalukya's last hope to save their kingdom from total destruction. In short, Rajadhiraja Chola was winning and destroying the Deccan. Someshvara was desperate and held a war meeting in hot Telangana. He got help from the Kakatiya chief and planned a surprise attack on the Chola homeland. A fast army was sent to burn Kanchi, hoping to force Rajadhiraja to retreat. It was a clever but dangerous move, a race against time. Would you like me to draw this out in a visual timeline or a map to help you see the locations and events? Here is a great, deep, very detailed summary of the passage you gave, written in the most simple way, like I'm explaining to someone with no background knowledge at all. Every part is explained clearly with full context, so you truly understand the meaning and the history behind it. Summary. This passage talks about a time in medieval South India, around 1050 AD, when the powerful Chalukya Empire was trying to control other older kingdoms in the south, especially the Pandya, Chera, and Pallava regions. 1. Some areas didn't obey Chola rule easily. The Chola kings, especially Rajaraja Chola and his grandson Rajadhiraja Chola, were expanding their empire. They ruled from the Kaveri River Valley, which was rich and fertile. But when they tried to take over the old lands of other kingdoms, like the Pandyas in Tamil Nadu, Cheras in Kerala, and Pallavas around Kanchipuram, these places were hard to control. The people there didn't easily accept Chola rule. The word recalcitrant means stubborn and disobedient. So these old kingdoms didn't want to follow the Cholas. Snart 2. The Pallava region near Kanchipuram was especially difficult. The Pallavas had ruled this area before the Cholas for many centuries. Their capital was Kanchipuram, also called Kanchi. It was a dry area, not green and fertile like the Chola homeland. This made it harder to manage. Also, the land was like a puzzle of many small groups. Local warrior families who had land and their own power, farming communities, and Brahmin villages, religious groups that had special privileges given by the old Pallava kings long ago. These groups had their own rules and didn't let the Cholas easily take control. So the Cholas never fully controlled this area, even though they had won it in war. 3. Rajaraja Chola renamed the region to show power. Even though the Cholas couldn't control the area very well, Rajaraja Chola still gave it a new name after conquering it. He called it Jayangonda Chola Mandalam, which means region of the victorious Chola. It was meant to show royal pride and victory. Later, his grandson Rajadhiraja Chola used this name as a royal title to remind everyone of the Chola victory and strength. This region became symbolically important to the Chola Empire. It helped show off their power, even if they didn't rule it well in reality. 4. But later, enemies attacked and humiliated the Cholas. Years later, a new threat came. A general named Pulakeshin from the Kakatiya dynasty in the Deccan, central South India, led an attack into Chola territory. His army captured Kanchipuram, destroyed its gates, burned its suburbs, the areas around the main city, and set fires to escape safely. This attack was especially embarrassing for the Cholas. Why? Because the general's name, Pulakeshin, reminded everyone of a famous king from 400 years ago, Pulakeshin Su, who ruled the Chalukya dynasty and had also fought in this region. It was like history repeating itself, and the Cholas were once again defeated by someone with that name. 5. Chola king Rajadiraja had to retreat. After this attack, the Chola king Rajadiraja Chola had to leave the Deccan region. He stopped his campaigns there and went back home to the Chola heartland. He took with him only the loot, treasures, he had already captured. This was a major failure for the Cholas, and it damaged their pride and power. Why this matters? It shows that even powerful empires like the Cholas couldn't always control everything. Some regions, like the Pallava heartland, had strong local identities and didn't want to be ruled by outsiders. It also shows how symbolic victories, like renaming a region, can be very different from real control, and how history and memory matter. The name Pulakeshin, coming back after 400 years, made the Chola defeat feel even worse. Would you like a map, a timeline, or a visual chart to help make all this even clearer? Here is a great, deep, and detailed summary of the passage you asked about, written in very simple, clear language, with extra explanation so you fully understand everything. Deep, detailed summary. The war between Cholas and Chalukyas, c. 1040s to 1050. In the mid-11th century, a major power struggle happened in South India between two great empires. The Chola Empire, ruled by Rajadhiraj Chola, based in Tamil country. The Western Chalukya Empire, ruled by Samshvara Ahavamala, based in the Deccan, Karnataka. This war was not just about land or gold. It was also about power, pride, and status, about who would be seen as the supreme king of the south. Rajadhiraj Chola's goals and actions. Rajadhiraja Chola wanted to defeat the Chalukyas completely, just like he had done to other kings in the south. Prove he was the most powerful emperor in India. Use symbols, rituals, and monuments to show the world that he had conquered his enemies. To do this, he, 1. Publicly insulted Chalukya ambassadors, showing he had no respect for the Chalukya king. 2. Built victory pillars in conquered areas to show his dominance. 3. Held a grand ritual, Virabhisheka, at the Chalukya capital Kalyana, declaring himself lord of that land. 4. Used symbolic items like a fierce door guardian statue to show religious and royal power. These were all carefully chosen acts of symbolism, meant to tell everyone, allies and enemies, I am in charge now. Chalukya response, Pulakeshin's raid on Kanchi. The Chalukyas hit back in a shocking way. A Chalukya general named Pulakeshin, named after the famous old Chalukya king Pulakeshin II, raided the Chola city of Kanchipuram, Kanchi. He destroyed the city gates, burned the outer parts of the city, and set fires to help his army escape safely. This raid was extremely humiliating for the Cholas, especially because it happened in their own heartland and was led by someone named Pulakeshin, as if history was repeating itself. It was a powerful way of saying, we are not defeated yet. The Chola failure at Raichur Doab. Even though Rajadhiraj had destroyed much of the Chalukya land and killed thousands, he could not fully conquer a key region, the Raichur Doab, a rich land between two rivers, Krishna and Tungabhadra, important for agriculture and trade. He tried very hard but failed to take full control. His army was weakened, and he needed more time to rebuild, so for now, he had to stop his invasion and retreat. Samshvara's calm and defiant response. Meanwhile, Samashvara Ayahavamala stayed strong. Even after all the damage, he did not lose his control over the Deccan region. Gave land grants, donated land, near Chola borders, a very bold move. This showed that the Chalukyas were still ruling peacefully, that they were not afraid of the Cholas, that they were acting like proper kings, even during tough times. This was a smart psychological strategy. By doing normal kingly duties like giving land, he showed that he was competent and powerful. The final result, after all the bloodshed, destruction, and dramatic battles, the Cholas were forced to stop. They could not defeat the Chalukyas. The Chalukyas still controlled their main region, the Deccan. The Raichur Doab remained under Chalukya influence. But the Chalukyas had to sacrifice a lot, including temporarily losing their capital city, Kalyana. War ended in a kind of stand. Neither side won completely. But the Chalukyas survived, and the Cholas had to pause and rethink their plans. Why this matters: big ideas. 1. Symbols were powerful. Kings didn't just use swords, they used rituals, statues, and buildings to show power. 2. Pride and image mattered. A king had to look strong even if he lost, and looking weak could be dangerous. 3. War wasn't always about land, it was also about respect, revenge, and royal status. The Cholas were powerful, but not invincible. Even the mighty Rajadiraja couldn't fully crush the Chalukyas. Would you like a visual timeline, map of the war, or a story-style version of this for easier understanding? Here's a great, deep, and very detailed summary of the passage, written in very simple English so anyone can. Summary: the rebirth of Kalyana, a grand city built from ashes. 1. A city destroyed by war. Kalyana was once a powerful city, but had been completely destroyed by the Chola king Rajadiraj during war. The buildings were burned down, temples ruined, and everything left in ashes. It was a symbol of defeat for the Chalukya kingdom. 2. A new vision by King Someshvara Chalukya. King Someshvara, a Chalukya ruler, decided to rebuild Kalyana not just as it was, but better, strong, glorious. He wanted it to become the new shining capital of his empire, a symbol of Chalukya pride and power. 3. Choosing a powerful location. Someshvara didn't pick just any place. He picked a smart and powerful location. It was right between the 3 big language regions: Kannada, Karnataka; Telugu, Andhra Telangana; Marathi, Maharashtra. This made the new Kalyana a center of trade, politics, culture, and language. 4. Using ancient architecture rules, Shilpa Shastra. The city was built using ancient Indian architecture science called Shilpa Shastra, especially the Manasara Shilpa. These explained how to design a perfect city, how wide the roads should be, where temples and palaces should go, where each group of people should live, how to use directions, north, south, etc., for energy flow. 5. Design of the new Kalyana. The city center had buildings, King's Palace, royal family temples. This central area was the heart of the city, sacred, powerful, and political. Around this center, the roads were laid out in a neat grid pattern, like lines on graph paper. Roads pointed in the 4 main directions: north, south, east, west. This created a harmonious energy flow from the king's palace to the rest of the city. 6. Who lived where in the city? Caste-based planning. The city was divided into zones based on people's caste and jobs. Near the palace, most respected area: Brahmins, priests, generals, and royal officials. Along main roads, merchants and traders, so they could easily do business and move goods. Far from the center, people doing physical work, lower castes: tailors, shoemakers, butchers, blacksmiths, oil pressers, weavers, cowherds, servants, etc. This reflects how society was organized back then. Caste rules can people lived and worked. 7. Why was this important? Someshvara wanted to show strength and revival after the war. Rebuilding Kalyana showed that the Chalukya dynasty was still powerful. The city became a symbol of hope, order, culture, and religion. Kalyana stayed important in people's minds for hundreds of years, until the 1500s. Conclusion: King Someshvara Chalukya took a ruined city and turned it into one of the most brilliant capitals in medieval India. By choosing a smart location, following sacred design books, and organizing people by caste and job, he made Kalyana a powerful symbol of Chalukya pride, planning, and royal greatness. The city's memory lived on for centuries. Would you like a simple illustrated map or sketch of how the city was laid out to make this even clearer? Absolutely. Here's a very simple, deeply detailed, and clear summary of the whole passage you gave, like the best teacher in the world explaining to a total beginner. Summary of the passage, in simplest, clearest way. The Chalukya kings wanted their city, Kalyana, to be one of the greatest and most impressive cities ever built. They didn't just want it to be big. They wanted it to make people say, wow, even just by looking at it. An old Sanskrit text even says that no city has ever been like Kalyana, and no city will ever be like it in the future. This shows how proud people were of it. At that time, Kalyana might have been one of the busiest and most crowded cities in South India. It had many people, many buildings, and a very active life. But today, to fully understand what it was really like, we need more digging and archaeological work at the place where Kalyana used to be, which is now called Basava Kalyan in modern-day Karnataka. What's very interesting is where the Chalukyas built Kalyana, on the exact spot where they once faced a huge defeat. A Chola king, their enemy, had burned that place, covered himself in its ashes, and declared himself a great warrior there. Still, the Chalukyas came back to that very spot and built their grand capital there. Like saying, we're not afraid, we are back, and we're stronger than ever. That shows pride and boldness. Inside the city, the royal court, generals, ministers, and other high officials lived in beautiful tall buildings, 2 or 3 floors high. These buildings were full of luxury, fancy wooden furniture with gold on it, rooms filled with Chinese silk, and colorful paintings on the walls. Powerful people also spent time with courtesans, trained dancers and singers, and wealthy traders. It was a city full of royalty, wealth, and beauty. But Kalyana was not only for rich people. Many ordinary people from across the Deccan, farmers, traders, craftsmen, pilgrims, and others, came there too. They came for jobs, business, religion, and opportunity. The city attracted all kinds of people. However, the things these common people did, their joys, problems, and daily lives, are still mostly a mystery because we haven't found enough evidence from archaeology yet. So, even though we know a lot about the rich and powerful in Kalyana, we still don't fully understand how most people lived. Finally, that about 300 older Chalukya kings like Vikramaditya II had also traveled across the Deccan to organize the rules and rights of cities and trade guilds. Now, King Sameshvara and his family were doing the same, continuing the old traditions of royal power and urban planning. Simple key points recap. 1. Kalyana was meant to be the most impressive city ever, according to old texts. 2. It was possibly the busiest and most crowded city in the Deccan during that time. 3. It was built boldly on the place where the Chalukyas had earlier lost badly to the Cholas. 4. The royal people lived in luxurious, tall buildings, gold, silk, and paintings. 5. Courtesans and traders. It was a social and lively city. 6. Common people from all over the Deccan came to the city for many reasons. 7. But we know too little every lives due to lack of evidence. 8. The Chalukya kings were continuing royal traditions of ruling and organizing the Deccan. Would you like a visual diagram or map of this summary too? Here is a great, deep, very detailed summary of the full path explained in the simplest possible way, like you're just starting to learn history. I'll break everything down into small, clear ideas that build the full picture. Super simple and deep summary. Long ago in South India's Deccan region, there was a time of fragile peace, meaning people had stopped fighting wars, but the peace was weak and could easily break. This peace came during the rule of a Chalukya king named Sameshvara, who ruled over a very large and powerful empire. Around 300 years before Sameshvara, there were earlier Chalukya kings, like Vijayaditya and his son Vikramaditya II, from a place called Vatapi, today called Badami. These earlier kings had traveled around the Deccan, meeting people in cities and towns. They made rules about who had what rights, what they could do, and what duties, what they must do. These rules were made to connect the people to the royal family. The king wanted to make sure everyone followed him and help the kingdom run smoothly. Sameshvara and his family also tried to do this, but by their time, things had changed a lot. How the world changed by Sameshvara's time. Much bigger empire. The Chalukya Empire had become very large. It now included many more cities, lands, and people. More complex cities. Earlier, cities were smaller and simpler, but now the cities had grown, become busier, richer, and more important. Managing them took a lot of work. More powerful local lords. Local nobles and rich families, called aristocrats, had become very strong. They had armies, land, and money. The king couldn't just order them around. He had to win them over by giving them titles, like Lord of the South, grants, land or money, alliances, friendship, sometimes marriage, privileges, special rights or benefits. Royal cities and inscriptions. In this time, stone carvings and inscriptions mention many royal cities. These were cities that had a direct connection to the king's family. These cities may have been ruled by royal relatives or were very important to the king's rule. Some of the cities named were Anagere, Mulugunda, Nadapura, Kohali, Banavasi, and many others. This shows how urban life had grown a lot. The cities were no longer just small places. They were now centers of trade, power, and politics, and the king had to carefully manage them. Comparison with the past. If we compare this time with the earlier Chalukya kings from Vatapi, 300 years before, we notice a big difference. The older inscriptions from earlier kings don't talk much about big cities or this kind of complex ruling system. This tells us that Someshvara's time was a new kind of rule, bigger, more complicated, and with many more challenges. Final summary in one paragraph, simplest form. During Someshvara's time, the Deccan had a weak peace. He tried to do what earlier Chalukya kings had done, travel, make rules, and control cities and workers. But now, things were much harder. The kingdom was bigger, cities were more advanced, and local nobles were stronger. The king had to give gifts, land, and honors to keep them loyal. Many cities were now directly linked to the royal family. Compared to 300 years earlier, ruling the empire had become much more complex, and city life had grown a lot. Would you like a diagram showing how the kingdom and cities were connected to the king? Or a timeline comparing the old and new Chalukyas? Here is a great, deep, and detailed summary passage in the simplest words, as if you're brand new to the topic. Main idea. In the time of the Kalyana Chalukyas, royal women, queens, were very powerful and helped rule the kingdom in ways that had not happened before. This was different dynasties like the Vatapi Chalukyas and Rashtrakutas, where women didn't have such public roles. This change happened because the families had become rich and politically strong, and the kings wanted to keep those families loyal to the empire. Why royal women became important. The families of the queens had changed a lot. They were once small local warlords, with little power, hiding in mud forts and doing raids. Over time, they became land-owning kings, with large farms, many workers, armies, and wealth. Their old forts turned into important towns, with markets, temples, and courts. These towns became centers of both Sanskrit culture, used by scholars and priests, and Kannada culture, local traditions and language. Because these families were now very powerful, the king had to include them in the way to do this was by marrying their daughters and giving those queens high positions of power. Examples of powerful queens. 1. Hoysala Devi. She was a queen of King Someshvara. She came from the Hoysala family, which had once been forest tribespeople in the Western Ghats. Her family had gained status, land, and wealth by helping the Chalukyas as generals and governors. 2. Kiti. She managed a Brahmin agrahara, which is a special village of priests and scholars to live, study, and do religious work. This means she controlled land and had religious authority. 3. Mailala Devi. She was senior queen, one of the king's main wives. In the year 1053, she was put in charge of a very important region called Banavasi 12,000. 12,000 may mean it had 12,000 villages, or it could just be a fancy name to show that it was a very high-status area. Banavasi used to be ruled by the Kadamba dynasty, who were defeated long ago by the earlier Chalukyas. By putting Mailala Devi in charge of Banavasi, the king was respecting old traditions and showing that the imperial family was now in control of that prestigious place. Who ruled Banavasi after Mailala Devi? Later, Banavasi was ruled by the king's cousin, who had Kadamba blood. His father was a small prince from the Kadamba line, and his mother was the king's aunt, Akadevi. then by Prince Vikramaditya, the king's second son. This shows that the imperial family kept a close hold on Banavasi to show their power and connection to the region's long royal past. Conclusion: deep understanding. This passage teaches us that the Chalukya Empire was smart and flexible. The king knew that he couldn't rule such a large and complex empire alone, so he used marriage alliances, and he gave real power to his queens and their families. This was a political strategy. It kept the powerful families loyal to the king. It allowed the empire to include many different people, old dynasties, new tribal leaders, and local cultures. It helped the empire stay strong and united, even as it got bigger and more complicated. Queens were not just sitting in the palace. They were rulers managing land for towns and showing the people that the king respected tradition and religion. Would you like me to create a visual timeline, family tree, or map of these places to make it even easier? Here is a great, deep, and detailed summary of the entire passage about Queen Akadevi, written in the simplest and clearest way possible. Who was Queen Akadevi? Queen Akadevi was one of the most powerful and active royal women during the time of the Kalyana Chalukya Empire around the 11th century. She was not just a queen in the palace. She ruled land, led armies, and handled government work. What made her special? 1. She was a warrior queen. People said she was like Bhairavi, a fierce goddess in Hindu mythology. That means she was brave in battle and known for defeating enemy kings. This was extremely rare in those days because war leadership was usually for men only. Mar 2. She ruled a large area. Akadevi controlled 3 big districts: Kisukadu 70 villages; Roragar 60 villages; Masavati 140 villages. That adds up to 270 villages, which is a very large area. She was governing like a king with full political power. 3. She led military campaigns. She played a key role in helping her nephew, King Someshvara, conquer a region called the Konkan in the year 1047. She personally commanded armies, showing she was not just symbolic, she had real military authority. 4. She managed government and trade. By 1050, she had so much authority that she could send out royal ministers and government officials. She used this power to rebuild the city of Sudi, which had been damaged by war with the Cholas. 5. She supported merchants and the economy. She helped the Cetis, rich merchants, and 80 households in Sudi by giving them back their corporate constitution, their trade rights and laws. This showed that she understood trade, economy, and administration, not just war. Sudi was an important trading city that had the power to make its own coins, so keeping it running was very important for the empire. Why is Queen Akadevi important in history? She is a rare example of a medieval Indian woman who held political, military, and economic power all at once. She shows us how the Chalukya Empire gave real power to some royal women, especially when they came from or ruled over importance. She helped protect and strengthen both the borders through war and the economy through trade and government. What does this teach us? Women in history were not always just behind the scenes. Some, like Akadevi, were leaders, warriors, and administrators. Akadevi's story shows a time when royal women could take charge like kings, especially in a complex and growing empire like the Chalukyas. Her leadership helped hold the empire together during tough times, especially when facing enemies like the Cholas. Would you like a simple timeline of Akadevi's life events, showing her powers and actions step by step? Absolutely. Here's a deeply detailed summary of the full passage, written in the most clear and simple way, like I'm teaching someone with no background at all. I'll explain not just what happened, but why it mattered, and how everything connects. Think of it as a full story summary, broken down into themes. The big picture. What was going on? This passage tells us about a time in medieval South India when a king named Samshvara from the Chalukya dynasty was trying to fix and organize his empire. Before him, the empire was chaotic and disorganized. Local rulers, army generals, and powerful landlords controlled different areas like mini-kings. The central king's government had weak control over them. Samshvara tried to change that. He wanted his government in the capital city, Kalyana, to have direct control over the towns, villages, and lands of the Deccan region. He began building a more systematic government that could send trained officials to do important jobs like record keeping, tax collecting, and justice. How things worked before Samshvara. 1. Tala Chalukya, an earlier Chalukya king, had taken power during a time of chaos. 2. The empire was under attack from multiple sides. 3. There was no proper system to run the empire. Everything was done randomly. 4. Local power centers, like generals or landlords, ran things in their own way, using their personal staff. 5. Army officers with huge titles like Great Furious Commander ruled over villages like warlords. 6. These officers managed law and order, taxes, land ownership documents. But they did all this with their own assistants, not trained government workers. What Samshvara did differently? Samshvara saw this messy system and tried to make it more regular and professional. Here's what he did. 1. Built an imperial chancellery. This was like a central government office where official records and decisions were written and sent out. A special department called the Office of Records started keeping track of land ownership and government orders. 2. Created a new class of officials. These were not military men. They were mostly Brahmins, smart, educated people trained to write, read, and manage. Many came from faraway places like Kashmir. Since they were not born in the local areas, they had no loyalty to local bosses. They served only the king. 3. Gave them real power. These Brahmin officials handled land grants, tax records, and justice. They followed rules and procedures, not just the orders of whichever noble was in charge locally. This made the system more fair, more centralized, and more stable. Why this was important? Samshvara was trying to reduce the power of local aristocrats, rich landowners, and nobles who could challenge the king. By using mobile, educated Brahmins, he built a team that was loyal only to him. This helped make his empire stronger, better organized, and less dependent on warlords or generals. Cultural impact. These new officials also helped bring back the use of Sanskrit in official documents. Earlier, different regions may have used different languages or styles. By making Sanskrit the standard, Samshvara made sure that all documents followed a common format and showed the power of the imperial court. Final summary. Samshvara of the Chalukya dynasty made a major reform in how his empire ran. He replaced the old messy system, where it ran everything their own way, with a more organized and loyal administration. He did this by creating a central record office, sending trained Brahmin officials, often from other regions, to run things, making sure those officials followed rules, not local nobles, and encouraging the use of Sanskrit in official documents. This change helped him strengthen royal power, weaken local bosses, and make the Deccan more unified under his rule. Would you like this rewritten as a story or visual comic summary? Or a chart comparing the old versus new system? On a Chalukya dynasty around the 10th. Here is a great, deep, and very clear summary of that entire passage in very simple language with extra detail to help you understand everything fully. Summary. How and why the Chalukya kings brought Sanskrit back into their land grants after Kannada had taken over. 1. Background. Rise of Kannada in official use. A Rashtrakuta king named Amogavarsha wrote a famous Kannada book called Kavirajamarga around the 9th century. This book helped raise the status of the Kannada language. It showed that Kannada could be a serious and powerful language, not just something common people spoke. After that, Kannada began to replace Sanskrit in many government and royal records. Even kings started mixing Kannada with Sanskrit in their royal titles, which showed that Kannada was gaining respect and official value. 2. Shift under the Kalyana Chalukyas. Kannada for locals, Sanskrit for emperors. By the time of the Kalyana Chalukya dynasty, around the 10th, 12th centuries, things had changed again. Most stone inscriptions, made by local nobles, big landowners, generals, etc., were still written in Kannada. These were meant for local people and local events. But the Chalukya emperors themselves started writing their official land grants in Sanskrit, not Kannada. These grants were not written on stone, but on copper plates about the size of an A4 sheet of paper. 3. Why did they go back to Sanskrit? The Chalukya emperors, like Samshvara, wanted to show that they were not just local rulers, but big, powerful kings with nationwide importance. Sanskrit had always been the language of religion, Hindu rituals and scriptures, royalty, high culture, prestige across India. So, by using Sanskrit again, they were trying to say, we are part of the grand royal tradition of India. 4. Special script used, Nagari. They didn't just use Sanskrit, they also chose a specific writing style for it, the Nagari script. This script was used by important kings even earlier, like Kirtivarman Sikh, Chalukya, and Danti Durga, Rashtrakuta, in the 700s. Nagari was popular in northern and central India, and among elite groups across the subcontinent. It was not the local Kannada script, but something that looked and felt more imperial and elite. It's related to today's Devanagari script, used in Hindi and Sanskrit now. 5. Message to the future. These land grants said they should be respected by future dynasties too, so the kings wanted the grants to be in a language and script that would last, and be understood and respected by future rulers and elites. That's why they used Sanskrit in Nagari script. It was like writing something in gold letters, meant to survive for centuries. 6. What this shows. This shift shows a smart political move by the Chalukya kings. They balanced Kannada for local rule, used in temples, towns, and local records, and Sanskrit for imperial identity, used to show power, connection with tradition, and status across India. It wasn't just about language. It was about power, respect, and legacy. In simple words, the story in one paragraph. Once Kannada became powerful thanks to the Rashtrakutas, even kings started using it for official work. But later, the Chalukya emperors like Sameshvara brought back Sanskrit, not because Kannada was weak, but because Sanskrit still had power across India. They wrote their land grants in Sanskrit, using a script called Nagari, related to today's Devanagari, because it made them look grand, traditional, and part of a bigger royal story. It was their way of saying, we are great kings, and we want people far and wide, now and in the future, to remember us. Would you like a visual chart comparing Kannada versus Sanskrit? Here's a great, deep, and very detailed summary of that passage, explained in the most simple way possible, like telling a story to someone new to history and economics. Big summary. How the Deccan changed over 500 years. A long time ago, the Deccan was a dry, broken land. There were many wars, very few cities, and people mostly survived by either trading goods directly, called barter, or stealing wealth during wars, called loot. This was not a stable or advanced society. Life was tough. But 500 years later, the Deccan became richer, more organized, and more like a modern society. The biggest change? Money, coins, started being used everywhere by all kinds of people. Before Old Deccan, people didn't use money. They traded things like grain, cloth, or cattle. Kings and soldiers took wealth by looting after wars. There weren't many towns or trade markets. Life was unstable. No banks, no easy trade, no common currency. After New Deccan 500 years later, 1. Coins everywhere. Coins were made not only by kings, but also by private businesses, with the king's permission. Gold coins for big transactions. Copper coins for small things, so even common people could use money. 2. Everyday use. Coins were used to buy goods in markets, like food, clothes, tools. They were used to pay workers, like masons, carpenters, and builders. Instead of giving someone grain or cattle, you gave them coins. Easier and faster. 3. Huge economic change. This made trade much easier and quicker. It also allowed people to store value. Saving money was now possible. Coins are fungible, meaning they can be used anywhere by anyone for almost anything. Grain cannot. 4. Banking and loans begin. As coins became common, people started lending and borrowing money. Temples and landlords, who owned lots of land and gold, started acting like early banks. They gave out loans and earned very high interest, like 30 to 40% per year. This was a new way of making money, not just farming, but lending. 5. Growth of financial networks. People began creating financial systems, lending and borrowing money, exchanging one kind of coin for another, depositing money and earning interest. This means the Deccan now had early forms of credit, savings, and currency exchange. 6. Result. Economic explosion. So much money started moving around that commercial activity, business and trade, boomed. Cities grew, roads improved, more shops, markets, and buildings appeared. People had more jobs, more ways to earn, and more ways to spend. Why this is so important? This change from barter and looting to a money economy was one of the most powerful changes in Deccan history. It helped create a more peaceful and stable society. People could earn money from work, not just war. It laid the foundation for trade, markets, finance, and eventually even banks. In short, think of it like this. Old Deccan, new Deccan economy. No coins, only barter loot. Coins in everyday use. Grain or cows for trade. Copper and gold coins used. No banking, loans, deposits, and interest. Poor, unstable economy. Active, growing, rich economy. Few cities and trade. Many markets. Workshops, cities. Would you like this as a visual infographic, a story version, or a timeline showing how this economic change happened over the centuries? Here is a great, deep, and very simple summary of the passage, explained clearly and fully, like teaching a smart child or beginner from scratch, with all hidden details brought to light. Nash, what was happening in the Deccan? Over hundreds of years, the Deccan, a large region in South India, changed completely. 1. From poor and war-torn to rich and bustling. In the early days, the Deccan was dry, full of wars, and had few cities. Most people bartered, traded goods like rice for sugar, because there was no money. The economy was simple. People farmed and made what they needed themselves. 2. The rise of coins and money. After 500 years, things looked very different. Money, coins, became common, not just gold, but also small-value copper coins. These coins were made in workshops, supervised by kings, but run by private workers. Why was this important? Money is easier than carrying grain or goods. With coins, you can buy anything quickly, pay workers like builders, lend and borrow money, save money, or earn interest on savings. Money made the economy faster and bigger. 3. Commercial explosion. Boom in business. More coins meant more people were buying and selling. A strong financial system grew. Banks or lenders gave loans and took deposits. People paid interest, sometimes as high as 30 to 40% per year. Who joined this money game? Temples and rich landlords became big investors. They wanted to earn high interest from lending money. Villages and cities, full of goods. Imagine walking into a market village or town at the time. You'd see drugs, medicine, clothes, spices, perfumes, oil seeds to make oil, jaggery and white sugar, gems of many kinds, grains, betel leaves, areca nuts, and more. You could buy anything you needed, from food to 5. People became specialists. In earlier times, people did both farming and manufacturing, like weaving clothes or making tools. But now, people focused on just one job. For example, someone might only make shoes and use their money to buy food. Another might only be a merchant, seller. This is called specialization. It makes work more efficient and allows trade to grow. Nash 6. Big farms and cheap food. Large estates, big farms, were run by wealthy landlords. Farms used bonded labor, workers who were tied to their land or masters, often with little freedom. Farms competed with each other by selling food at low prices. So, people who didn't farm could still buy food easily with their money. 7. Lords wanted merchants to come. Landlords and kings realized something. If we attract merchants, our towns will become richer. So they gave free land to traders, charged lower taxes to producers and sellers. This helped build market towns where goods were made and sold. 8. Towns run by merchants. Some merchants became so rich and powerful that they ran entire towns. They were called Patanasvami, which means Lord of the City. These merchant lords worked with kings and landlords, but they had real power. What does all this mean? The Deccan was no longer a simple land of farmers and fighters. It had become a money-powered, trade-rich society. There were markets full of goods, workers paid in coins, loans and interest, specialized jobs, growing towns and cities, powerful merchant classes. In simple modern terms, it's like the Deccan went from being a small farming village to a mini version of a modern economy with banks, businesses, markets, shops, working classes, and landlords investing for profit. Would you like this turned into a timeline, infographic, white or story-style visual lesson? Here is a great, deeply detailed, and very simple summary of the entire passage. It explains the core ideas, important facts, and big themes, like a wise teacher telling a curious student about a forgotten chapter of Indian history. 1. Medieval India was full of life and power. Between 600 and 1200 CE, India, especially regions like northern Karnataka, transformed from simple farming villages into powerful kingdoms with great cities, courts, and temples. In early centuries, like the 600s to 700s, these areas were mostly pastoral, meaning people raised animals like cows and goats. Village-based, small communities, no big cities. Not very urban, very few markets, temples, or large buildings. But over time, they changed completely. 2. A new kind of ruling class rose. This new ruling class was diverse, from many different castes, not just warrior kings. Polycentric, there was no single center of power. Many courts and kingdoms shared power. Always changing. People gained and lost power often. One day a noble might be powerful, next day he's defeated. They came from all types of castes, Brahmins, warriors, even merchants, and each tried to climb higher, gain more land, and gain respect. 3. Courts were full of competition and luxury. These rulers all competed to be more famous, to show off more wealth, to collect rare items from faraway lands, like spices, silks, or precious stones. They built temples, hosted poets and musicians, and dressed in rich clothes to show off their status. Their courts were glamorous, like Bollywood award shows, full of light, art, and pride. 4. Trade and expansion fueled the growth. Why did this transformation happen? Because of warfare. Kings fought to grab land. Agrarian expansion. They cleared forests to make new farms. Religion. Temples spread, and kings supported Brahmins and monks. Politics. New systems of rule, taxes, symbols of rank, and armies grew. This made India more wealthy, but also more complex, with many layers of leaders, taxes, and rules. 5. These changes spread all across India. This wasn't just in Karnataka. Similar changes happened in Tamil Nadu, Cholas, in central India, in eastern India, Palas, in western India, Gujarat, Rajasthan, even in parts of Bengal. The entire subcontinent saw more cities, temples, forts, courts, and religious networks being built. 6. These medieval roots shaped modern India. Many things that started in this period still survive. Temples we still worship in today. Caste structures still followed. Ways of trade and rule that modern governments inherited. Cultural habits around kings, land, and religion. This period laid the foundation for Indian society as we know it today. 7. But medieval India is forgotten today. Sadly, when people think of medieval times, they imagine European knights with swords and horses, Middle Eastern sultans in palaces. But they don't remember India's medieval kings, queens, temples, forts, and courts, even though they were just as grand and complicated. Our own Indian medieval past has been erased from our imagination, even though it was full of glory, beauty, and struggle. In short, medieval India, 600 to 1200 CE, was rich, powerful, and very complex. A new class of rulers from many castes competed for wealth and fame. Kingdoms grew through war, farming, and religion. Indian society completely transformed from simple villages to great courts. This laid the foundations of modern India. But sadly, most people today forget this vibrant medieval Indian world and only remember European or Islamic medieval imagery. Would you like me to write this in bullet points for memorization or as a children's story version? Here is a great, deep, and detailed summary of the passage, written in very simple words, so even someone with no background can understand everything. Half size of temple building in 11th century India. In the 11th century, around 1000 CE, India, especially the Deccan region, saw a huge growth in temple building. This happened because many people had become very rich and powerful, including kings, nobles, lords, and merchants. These people wanted to show off their wealth, power, and religious devotion. And one of the best ways to do that was by building big, beautiful temples. To build these temples, they hired skilled architects and builders called stapatis. These stapatis were experts in designing and building temples using stone. They usually worked in groups called guilds, like a company or a team. These guilds were based in fast-growing cities where trade and politics were strong. Because there were many rich people with money, skilled builders ready to work, and cities growing fast, there was a boom in temple construction. That means temples were being built everywhere, and they were bigger and more artistic than ever before. This was also a golden age for Sanskrit literature. Sanskrit was the language used by scholars and poets, and during this time, many religious books, poems, and even books about architecture were written. A famous example is King Bhoja of the Paramara dynasty in Malwa. He was a very learned king who dreamed of building a Shiva temple called Bhojeshvara. He even wrote a book called Samarangana Sutradhara, which explained how to build temples and palaces. His dream became possible because now the skills and tools finally existed to build such a massive stone structure. Other great examples of temple architecture from this time include Gangaikonda Choleshvara Temple, built by Rajendra Chola in Tamil Nadu. Rani Ki Vav, a stepwell built in Gujarat. Both of these are now UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which means they are protected as treasures of the world. These buildings show that builders, stapatis, in the 11th century could make enormous, strong, and beautiful structures. They could even adjust their designs to suit different local lands, climates, and styles. All of this progress was only possible because for centuries, since the 500s or 600s, people had been slowly learning, experimenting, and gathering wealth. Over time, kingdoms became richer and builders became smarter. So by the 11th century, India had the resources, knowledge, and skill to build great temples that still stand today. In short, the 11th century was a great time for temple building in India. Rich people wanted to show their power, expert builders were available, and cities were growing. This led to huge, beautiful temples like never before, thanks to centuries of learning and growth. Would you like a map showing where Bhojeshvara, Gangaikonda Choleshvara, and Rani Ki Vav are located in India?